Hello, I've just watched your KTBlackadder video on intelligence and atheism. I think, as always, you raised very good points extremely well. I wrote down some things as you were speaking, and it made me think of some other things. Obviously, you're absolutely right that there is a correlation between intelligence and atheism. I don't think there's causal either way. I think it's that critical thought that intelligent people take the risk with. Obviously, people like Newton, very, very intelligent, very, very religious. You could say it's because he didn't have access to certain facts. So there's certain facts that we've learned since, as well as the sort of cultural, social, it's more acceptable, certainly in England, to be atheist, and things like that. And there isn't the disadvantages that there were in Newton's day of declaring himself atheist. But of course, by all accounts, he was a very earnest believer. But would he have been that way had he, known about galaxies? Had he known about the Big Bang? Had he known about Einstein? I don't know what fact. Certainly back then, religion was more black and white. So, it was as the Bible said. It was absolutely as the Bible said, interpreted and footnoted by the church. So a fact may have been more devastating back then. I don't know. I don't think you can do that. Certainly one of the things I found with debating with theists is that there needs to be some sort of overlap of starting position where you're coming from. Otherwise you quickly there isn't enough sort of common ground to have a reasonable or useful debate. So, for instance, they'll say, you might ask, well, how do you know that God is real? And they say, because I just kind of have faith, and I know, and seem to have rather a low threshold of what they need to know before they will commit to believing. Yet you say, here's the evidence for evolution, which is devastating by anybody's definition of the word, and they say, it's not 100% certain. You can't prove it's 100% certain. You can only prove that it's. Suddenly they have this, this barrier, this hurdle that nobody could reasonably get over, because suddenly they are so objective and so such a high, Cartesian doubt about absolutely everything. So I think that's the case with a lot of theists. I think you have to have. Certainly, it's a lot easier being English debating with an English theist, because in general they tend not to have all of this baggage, and there is this obviously the politeness that goes along with it. So people are far less likely to start effing and jeffing immediately. I wrote down correct versus consistent. A lot of the atheism, I think, is consistent with a logical and critical view of the world and a scientific view of the world. That doesn't mean that it's correct objectively, but in terms of searching for the absolute truth, which is where a lot of philosophers want to go down, and it's absolutely right. There's this search for absolute truth and objective truth and things like that is very interesting. However, you can get paralysed by it, or at least held up by it. The people, mankind was able to put a lunar module on the moon whilst many of those people still earnestly believed in God. They didn't have to resolve absolute truth in order to do it, and I think that's where science has such a tremendous advantage. It's truth, almost truth versus use, but I don't mean versus as though they're competing. I mean, you can go so far and say, right, that's safe to assume that that's correct, and I think for the majority of us, that's what we do. Is you get an understanding to a certain level. And then that has use in your debt, whether it's work or whatever, or online. The law of diminishing returns, I think, stops many of us from worrying too much about detailed calculus in helping us give any additional understanding in things like general relativity or things like that. You can get a very devastatingly brilliant understanding of these things without advanced mathematics, for example. But you can't say that you have access to all of it. If I'm making myself clear, I'm obviously not as clear as you, because you're very clear. So I mean, that's what I would say. I don't think that IQ is a measure of how well you take IQ tests. You're naturally going to find a lot of atheists and people who've taken IQ tests in the Royal Academy, because those are all people who are big on critical thought, asking questions, making sure those answers, caring that those answers are right, and then testing those answers to see if they're right as well. They really own that knowledge, and they have a very high threshold of what they'll accept and what they won't accept. So it's not surprising, but I think atheism is a symptom of the intelligence, if you know what I mean, rather than a natural progression from it. Say if there were a Royal Academy of poetry, which I'm sure there probably is, I wonder whether there'd be such a correlation between who's in that Royal Academy of Poetry and people who believe in auras and tarot cards or read their horoscopes every morning. Do you know what I mean? So there's, as you clearly say, there's different types of intellectual excellence, IQ, scientific style, like that, and obviously the number of people, as you say, the number of people who are likely to have been tested IQ in Iran, for IQ in Iran, is probably quite low. So it's very easy to make these generalizations, particularly where they haven't had the opportunity to develop the skills that are tested in an IQ test. Just on a final point, I agree with everything you say. I'm just chipping in with my view here. I found when I'm debating with sort of on the cusp, the less philosophical I sound, the less the smaller the amount of jargon they use. Because when you're debating with a lot of it, people who've studied philosophy, it's very, especially if you're early on in your studies, you tend to deploy a lot of jargon words that are very clear to you but not very clear to the other person, and you're not really communicating effectively if that's what you're doing. And I found the less you sound like you study philosophy, the more people will accept your points. And that's not dumbing down, that's showing knowledge of your subject, that you can convert what you're saying into those things. And I think Thunderfoot, for example, does that beautifully with science. Nobody can watch a Thunderfoot video and go, I just feel stupid now. You don't. After watching that video, you feel like you know more, which is the essence of a good video. Nobody wants to watch any video or take anything away, or will take anything away from a video that makes them feel excluded from that. And that is why a lot of theists, I think, who are taking those first tentative steps down the path of questioning some beliefs and trying to think critically, are turned away because they say, well, I can be expert in Jesus because every Christian is an expert in Jesus. One thing I've noticed about Islam with some of my Muslim friends is they'll talk about some things, but interpreting scripture, they will always refer you to their imam or somebody they know knows the book better. They don't, like Christians will say, Jesus said this, Jesus likes this, God hates this. Certainly in my experience, the Muslims I know have always referred me on certain matters to go and speak to a professional, which I like, really. And it's, in the way they're thinking, but obviously what the outcome is they defend what they're saying. And I wonder whether some atheists might do better with certain things to be posting links to other videos, you know, some of those Thunderfoot videos, for example, rather than their take on different things. I don't know. Anyway, that's what I think. I've probably been rambling 10 minutes, which is probably on the upper limit of how much anyone can bear to watch of me. So anyway, lovely video, and I hope that adds something to the discussion. Thanks very much. Bye.